right, so today we're going to learn about Reading Literature Standard 9 and 10.3. So the same standard applies to 9th and 10th graders. So this is just Reading Literature Standard 3. And it is about analyzing complex characters. And let's get started. All right, so the standard reads, analyze how complex characters, example, those with multiple or conflicting motivations, develop over the course of a text, interact with other characters, and advance the plot or develop the theme. So this should just be a review. In the scaffolding document for this standard, this is what you should already know before learning this standard. And I think you should be pretty familiar with these because I know you've covered these in all of your past years, but we'll just quickly go back over these. So we'll start with what a static character is. The static character remains the same throughout the story, undergoes no change in thought or personality when involved in conflict. Compared to a dynamic character, undergoes change as a result of learning from conflict, or starts the story one way and then will have a revelation that changes his or her view. A flat character only has one or two character traits, no depth, fills a simple role. Compared to a round character, has many character traits, various qualities, complex, and more like a real person. Most main characters are round characters. Okay. So direct and indirect characterization. Direct characterization tells the character or tells the reader about the character. For example, she was a cheery, always upbeat person. And compared to indirect characterization, it shows the reader about the character. For example, her lighthouse smile beckoned across the crowd. So it doesn't directly tell us that she's a cheery person, but based on her lighthouse smile, we can tell that this is a cheery person. Also, the protagonist and antagonist, you've heard these terms, I'm sure, for a long time, but the main character is a protagonist, usually advocates for a particular cause or idea. The antagonist is the character who opposes, stands against, or struggles with the protagonist. It's not always just like good versus evil, but it can be. The antagonist is just something or somebody who opposes with the protagonist. Okay. And then the plot chart, you should be familiar also with the parts of the plot. For this standard, we'll mainly focus on the conflict that leads to the climax, and then everything else comes after that. So after the review that comes with that standard, this is what the actual standard covers, okay? This is what you should be able to do when you master this standard, okay? So you should be able to identify a complex character in the text. You should be able to cite evidence in a text that shows the complexity of a character. And you should identify the motivations of characters within a text and determine when these motivations are conflicting. Also, explain how complex characters contribute to the theme or central idea of a text as a whole. So as you can see, this standard actually contains elements of a different standard, which is Reading Literature 2, which talks about the theme or central idea of the text. So that's why it's important to be familiar with all of the standards, and you should be able to master one thing because it will always tie in with something else. So let's practice together. So this is a poem by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This poem was written in sorry, 1884. So this was a long time ago. Keep in mind that a woman wrote this in the late 1800s. So just keep that in mind, okay? So it reads, I was climbing up a mountain path with many things to do, important business of my own and other people's too, when I ran against a prejudice that quite cut off the view. My work was such as could not wait. My path quite clearly showed my strength and time were limited. I carried quite a load. And there that hulking prejudice sat across all the road. So I spoke to him politely, for he was huge and high, and begged that he would move a bit and let me travel by. He smiled, but as for moving, he didn't even try. And then I reasoned quietly with that colossal mule. My time was short, no other path. The mountain winds were cool. I argued like a Solomon. He sat there like a fool. Then I flew into a passion, and I danced and howled and swore. I pelted and belabored him till I was stiff and sore. He got as mad as I did, but he sat there as before. And then I begged him on my knees. I might be kneeling still, if so I hope to move that mass of obdurate ill will, as well invite the monument to vacate Bunker Hill. So I sat before him helpless in an ecstasy of woe. The mountain mists were rising fast. The sun was sinking slow. When a sudden inspiration came, as sudden winds do blow. I took my hat, I took my stick, my load I settled there. I approached that awful incubus with an absent-minded air, and I walked directly through him, as if he wasn't there. Okay, so there are a lot of thoughts after you read this, and if you need to pause the screen and reread this again, or even another time, you're more than welcome to. I also added the footnotes on what some of these words mean. So, for example, right here, colossal, it explains to you what that means, and here's number 2, and so forth. Okay, so going back to the review, things that you should already look at. So you can walk through and tell who the static character is. So the 2 main characters that we have in this story are the narrator, which we assume is a woman in the late 1800s, and then we have prejudice, okay? And prejudice in this case is referred to in the masculine. He smiled, he didn't even try, okay? So here we have a woman and a man. So the static character, who never changes, who never moves his view, never moves physically, is the man, okay? The dynamic character that we can point out would be the woman, okay? And then the protagonist in this case is the woman. The main character advocates for a particular cause or idea, which we will talk about in a second. And then the antagonist is the one who opposes the protagonist. So who is the only other character in this case is, or opposing force is the man, which is named prejudice in this case. Okay. So looking at the mastery of this standard, can we identify the complex character after this? Would it be prejudice, who never moves, never changes his view or his physical stance? He would not be the complex character. The complex character would be the woman, which is the narrator in this case. So cite evidence in the text. We can go back to the text. Sorry about that. Okay, so back to the text. You should be able to cite evidence. Citing evidence isn't just telling me that the woman changed her reactions. That's not what citing evidence means. That's just pointing it out. Citing evidence means actually looking at the line and word for word from the text, okay? So in this case, let's find proof that the woman reacts differently throughout the text and changes her views and changes her reaction and emotions. So she starts by identifying the conflict. She runs into prejudice, right? Okay. So first, she speaks to him politely. So if you were to cite evidence, you would directly quote in quotation marks. So I spoke to him politely. Okay. That's the first reaction that we see. The next piece of evidence we can pull from here is, and then I reasoned quietly. Okay, so these are kind of similar. But then if you go to the next stanza, she says, then I flew into a passion. So here we see that she is changing throughout the story. Okay, she goes from polite to reasons quietly. Then she flies into a passion. Okay, the next piece of evidence we can cite is, and then I begged him on my knees. And then she sits before him helpless in an ecstasy of woe. And then lastly, you could pull with an absent-minded air. Well, that's what he was doing. Okay. So lastly, you can pull, and I walked directly through him as if he wasn't even there. Okay. So that is where you are citing evidence that shows that she is a complex character because she underwent many changes in this text. Okay. So now looking at the motivations of the characters within the text, determine when those motivations are conflicting. Okay. So going back to the text, what was her motivation? Her motivation was to make it through, right? She was trying to make it up the mountain path. Of course, are things just as literally as they seem in a piece of text? No. Who is the antagonist? It's prejudice, okay? If it just said Tom was standing in her way or Billy was standing in her way, then it's like, okay, man, get out of the way, right? But since the man is named Prejudice, we can assume that there's a bigger meaning in this text, which is, almost 99.9% of the cases with literature. That's the beauty of it. So this woman is already going up the mountain. So she's got an uphill battle because she's carrying many things on her shoulder. Do you think it's just talking about that? No, it's talking about a woman in the late 1800s with not many rights at all and many expectations of them to be just docile creatures with not many brains or input, during this time is what was believed of them. So her conflicting motivation is that she's trying to do this uphill battle in life, and you've got a man who is prejudiced against her. She's having to deal with a lot of struggles and obstacles, hence the title, from a man. It's a man's world, and it's very hard for a woman in this day and age to make it through. Okay, so we can say that is the conflicting motivation. And what is the motivation of the man in the story Prejudice? It's to stop the woman and halt her path. Okay. And then lastly, explain how complex characters contribute to the theme or central idea of the text as a whole. All right, so now that we're at the end, I can go to this. This is kind of where I put all of the answers. But, so explain how complex characters contribute to the theme. So we can say that the theme of this story is about a woman's adversity and what she deals with in life. And the central idea of it is that she eventually overcomes adversity, no matter what obstacles, she keeps going and going and going. And of course, who wouldn't react these ways? If you're dealing with adversity and prejudice in life, and this is, applies to anybody. This is a theme. A theme is that somebody reacts to adversity and overcomes it. So this can deal with man, woman, race versus race. So it could deal with anything, anybody dealing with adversity. So as she reacts throughout the story, she goes through trying to speak with him politely. So if you were in an altercation with somebody and you just felt that you were being pushed down when you're already at a vulnerable position, you might speak to them politely to try to get away from it. Then you might reason a little bit, and constantly being beaten down, you fly into a passion, and then you beg to be heard and to be helped. So you're there helpless. But then eventually, you bring your head up high and you ignore those with an absent mind, and you walk directly through them as if they weren't there, and you make it through. So that is kind of the main idea of this poem. So this is how we've kind of checked off the four main things that come with mastering the standard. And if we can, let's see. Okay, and then another thing to point out real quick, when you're citing evidence, make sure that you are directly, word for word, putting in quotes what comes from the story, okay? And that's pretty much it. If you can point out these four things in a text regarding complex characters, you should be able to master this standard about analyzing complex characters. If you have any questions about anything, you can always email me at pruiz@pcsd.ms. Also, this actually is in your packet for your summer learning packet that we have just sent out at North. And this story is directly from there. So this video should help you with some of those questions, because it does talk about complex characters and then main idea. So I hope this helps. And like I said, if you have any questions, you can always reach out. Thank you.